taking some time to join us here today. As Katana mentioned, my name is Joe Eikens, Manager Director of our what we call the Building Lifecycle Solutions team. Really, what it is the team of technical folks inside Imagine throughout the U.S. and Canada that have really anything to do with buildings, whether it's design, construction, facilities management. All those sorts of folks are hanging out, and I get the pleasure of being able to work with them. I've been with the company now for around about 20 years. It's one of those things where getting to that point in life where you put the little plus at the end of numbers, just because. We'll leave it at that. But before this, before joining Imagine, I did a lot of schools, healthcare centers, things like that prior to joining this side of life. Since joining Imagine, I spent a lot of time working in different modes throughout the 20 years that I've had here. It's been a mix of working at home, working in an office, working at a hotel room, working in somebody else's office, working in an airport, you name it. It's one of those places where I've probably had that type of a working environment somewhere through there. And as we're talking about it in terms of this idea of remote solutions, hopefully, some of that experience that I've got that really everybody on my team has is something that we can use to provide some value, provide some thoughts, or get people thinking about what's going on. Now, as we're going through this, we have had a webcast, a session on remote solutions already. It was a couple months back, certainly, but we've talked about it. And in that first webcast, we talked about how are we dealing with, how do you know if you're doing all you can, and the questions that you see there. This time around, we're going to add to that. Now, we're not going to ignore that first set of things. We're still going to talk a little bit, but more of a faster recap sort of way. We're not going to spend the full 40 minutes talking about all these different things. We'll narrow it down a bit. So we'll be touching on those items, retouching on those items for how are we dealing with it? What are the different ways that we can define and talk about remote solutions that are out there to make sure that we're talking with the same language. We've got the same foundation underneath us. But then we'll turn around and be taking some time to think about, well, what does this really matter in the current world that we're in now, which is, it's different from what it was a year ago. It's certainly still even different from what it was a few months back. But in the world we're in now, what's it matter? Where do we take this? How does all this stuff that we're talking about fit in and build with what you've got for business objectives? And work through them. So that's our intent. And as we're going through all of this, there should be a fair amount of time that we'll have at the end for Q&A. Want to make sure that we've got that ability to be able to talk about or share comments, thoughts, whatever you've got. So as they're coming around, again, please do type that into the Q&A panel, and we'll get to those at the end of the session here. With that as our intro of why are we here, who's this guy that's talking to you, all that sort of fun stuff. One of the first things we want to do from a recap standpoint is make sure that we've got that foundation. And everything that has, the slide title here says recap was something that we will have talked about in greater detail in that previous webcast, which was also recorded. So at any point in time, we can go back to that as well, or reach out and say, hey, let's have a more personalized one-on-one type conversation to talk about these things specifically as it pertains to you and your business. But no matter what, when we're talking about defining what's involved with remote work solutions that are out there, we broke it into these four primary categories of how are you connected back to the office. If we assume that we're in this world where everybody or at least most people on your immediate team are geographically separated. There's going to be maybe some people in the office, maybe nobody in the office. People working at home, people working from wherever those types of places might be. So at one point in time or another, we have to be able to connect back to company infrastructure, whether you call it the office or if you've got a cloud solution or whatever it is, we've got to connect back to that office environment somehow. As we're connecting back to that office environment, we need to understand how do your different design applications work inside that type of connection. We'll break all of these down into their details, but what do your design applications look like and how do they work in a remote environment? How could they work better or different in that type of remote environment? Once you know how you're connecting to company assets and you know what applications you're using for that, how do you use all those to start collaborating better across the project? Now, it changes things a bit when we're talking about project collaboration because to some degree, it's not just yourself and your own team from your company, but everybody else that you might be working with and partnering on a project might also be working remote. And what tools and solutions do they have in place that we're working with? A lot of things that come through. And then finally, how are you delivering on that project? Whether you're using, in-house tools, third-party tools, or whatever else to connect to the office, your design applications, how you're working with each other. How does that all come back through to say, what are we doing to actually deliver on this project? And has that changed any from when we were all physically in the same building to a spot here where we're not in the same building or inside the same internet domain if you've got multiple offices? You get where I'm going from. As we're talking about all these things and breaking it down, we have to be thinking about each and every one of them in a combination of how does this thing, office connectivity, design applications, project collaboration, project delivery, how are all of those things impacted by the people that are involved, the technology that's rolling around, and the processes that you have in place? How do people process technology affect and work with your connection back to the office, behind the firewall, VPNs, whatever? How do they work with the collaboration modes? So all of these things come through there. From an imaginative standpoint, we've been, since I've been with the company, been touting the need in any sort of technology discussion, any sort of a workflow or process discussion. We need to not just involve the process, not just the technology, but get all three of those things in together. It's always a combination of people, process, and technology that are involved in a solution. So keeping those things in mind. Now, if we start breaking it down a little bit more, and again, just getting those high level types of things, when we're talking about office connectivity, we need to know what are you doing? And you might have something already in place. I'm sure you have something in place by now, right? It might be cloud-based workstations. You might be using BIM 360 now, Collaborate Pro. You might be using VPNs, remote desktops, Microsoft Teams, GoToMeeting. The list goes on and on. Zoom meetings. You might be doing voice over IP, like a weird thing. So kind of going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but oh well. One thing that is curious for myself personally, in a change that I've seen me go through as we've made this working remote thing much more common everywhere, is I'm not in my office in my imaginative office building in Colorado. I'm not there. I'm in my home office space talking to y'all. But in my office at the building, I have a phone. You could call it plain old telephone service POTS, but it was a phone. And every once in a while, I pick up the phone and call somebody. And I never thought twice about picking up the phone and calling somebody. But now that I know that everybody is remote and we're doing all of our communication, in our case, predominantly through Microsoft Teams, I don't just grab the phone button and call somebody through Microsoft Teams. I'm almost always just typing a quick IM to them first and saying, hey, do you have a sec? And then they reply, and then I'll call. It's a weird thing, and there's a curiosity in my own head of how is Joe Eichenseer's mentality going to change when we're all more back in the office? Am I just going to be picking up the phone some more, or am I going to keep with the habits that I've got now, which are probably a little bit more polite in some ways, of checking with somebody before calling them? But it's connectivity. How are you connecting back to the office to be able to make these connections with people? Now, if we have all these different types of data or technology solutions out there for connecting back into the office, to the backbone of your company, How are you using them? So if you're using VPNs, if you're using BIM 360, Collaborate Pro, if you're using things like that, no matter what you are using, everything that you have comes down to either one of two categories when it comes to your design software, at least. In one of them, you're bringing data to the users. BIM 360 Collaborate Pro works that way. Autodesk Revit Server, if you're using that, goes that way. Box, Dropbox, things like that, where you're synchronizing data to the end user machine. That'll be where you're bringing data to the users. Then the other option is you reverse the flow and you bring users to the data. That'll be, as you can see, remote desktops in whatever form it takes. And you're remotely connecting to a place where the machine you're remotely controlling is right next to the data, as opposed to the machine you're controlling is directly in front of you and the data is somewhere else. We can, all of those work and they can work just fine. It just needs to be, how is it working for you? Are you taking your home computer and doing a remote desktop session, connecting back to the computer that's in the office, and that's how you're running Revit, AutoCAD, whatever it happens to be? Or is it local to you? And it's not to say, again, neither one is good or bad. It's just knowing and identifying that. And this is the technology stack that we have in place that comes into the information, the context we need to make decisions and understand how things are going along. And understanding, how are all of those working? Is it fast or slow? Does it just always work? It may not be fast, but it's solid connection. There's a lot to be said for that. Is it fast but buggy? Yeah, understand how those are going. How happy is everybody using the system that you're in? So in the first webcast we had talking about remote solutions, there's a lot of emphasis we were talking about at that point in time of understand and be thinking about all of these things, the end user experience, not how easy is it for me or our IT group to manage and administer. That's a factor. We're not discounting that. But at this point, we're spending most of our time trying to think of how are we accounting for staff satisfaction in the system that we have set up. How's that working? I saw a headline recently that was talking about some of these things with staff satisfaction, and the ranges are all over the book. There's some places where everybody's totally stoked and they're amazed at how seamless the transition went, and there is other places where people have been struggling a little bit. Understand where those things are at, and once you know where those struggles are, then we can start having some more targeted pieces of identifying what can we do to fix it. Is it a slow connection and buggy because somebody's working from the Appalachian Mountains on a internet connection that's being passed through their cell phone? Okay, well, that certainly lets us know where we're at and where we need to go to get to that next step. So those were some of the questions that we were asking about the technology that you have for making the connection back to your home office. From there, if we're taking to the next piece, then we're talking about, well, what applications are you using across that backbone? What design applications do you have there? Are they appropriate for the infrastructure? If you've got that situation where you have somebody that's connecting through their cell phone hotspot, because that's the way they have to work for whatever reasons are there. It's something of an absurd example, but hey, let's go to extremes. If that's the case, then you're probably not going to enjoy a remote desktop experience. You'll probably be at a spot where you're better off downloading a bunch of files, working on them, and then uploading or synchronizing later on, because it's going to be shorter bursts of activity, but all the heavy processing is local to you, not relying on a cell phone hotspot interconnect connection. So are the design tools and the way you're working appropriate for that infrastructure? And then from there, are you getting all that you could out of that? If you're in the BIM 360 design, Collaborate Pro environment, are you taking advantage of all the different tools that you have inside those software packages? Or are you just using it to share Revit files? It's not to say that it's a bad thing to be using it for just Revit files, but if you have all these other features that are there and can be useful, why not go for it? And make sure that the tools that you are using are helping and trying to support that virtual collaboration wherever possible. It's not going to be 100%, but wherever possible, let's see where it's going. Are people using Dropbox effectively? So internally for the Imagine side, we've got a big old Dropbox infrastructure for a lot of different types of documents. And there's no way that I could synchronize the full set of contents of the Dropbox folder that I have access to my local hard drive on my laptop. There's too much data. I got way too much up there. So does everybody on my team know how you can selectively control what files and folders get synchronized locally and how to reset that from time to time to go through hard drive cache management? How do those different things work? It's that mix of applications and technology to get it going through there. And make sure you're taking that honest look at things. Just because it works just peachy fine for me doesn't mean it's going to be great for everybody else. So let's find that right mix as we're looking at this so that you can make legitimate decisions and improvements where possible to your virtual environment. So understand the software applications that you have, desktop, remote desktop, wherever you happen to be running them. Mobile applications. How many things do you have that run off of a phone or a tablet that people want to be able to use instead? More and more, when we're rolling out hardware for ourselves internally, it's not just, here's a laptop and a mouse and a power cord. There's mobile technology that comes into play as well as business changes, not just because of coronavirus, pandemic, COVID, whatever, but just business in general is changing. So how are we accounting for that? Then going into the collaboration side. So if we've got the technology, we've got the applications, how are we using them to better collaborate? And my suggestion for this one, and again, these are kind of summary slides as we're going through a lot of this, make sure that as you're looking at how are you collaborating across these things, get yourself a devil's advocate. It could be somebody inside your company. It could be somebody outside your company. From time to time, I'm sure she's looked for better things to have conversations about with me than this, but I bounce things off of my spouse. So I talk to her about whatever is going on, and sometimes just the act of talking out loud about a challenge or a thing that's going through my mind helps you to realize what the right answer is, because you're verbalizing it. It's not just stuck in your head, that extra action of forcing your body to think about things and to process it to become words that come out of your mouth. Make you think about it in different ways. And I'll be thinking about something and I'm all stuck. I'll be talking to my wife about that, and then halfway through the conversation, as I'm trying to just explain what the situation is that I'm trying to figure an answer for, it's like, oh, I know what the answer is, and we're good to go. And she's off in the corner, able to continue knitting away, and everybody's happy. Get that person, that devil's advocate that can ask pointed questions in a productive way, in a building way, not trying to tear something down, but get somebody who can ask those pointed questions and help identify what's good and what's not good. Somebody who's not just going to be that next yes man or yes woman coming in there and just agreeing with whatever. Get somebody to bounce ideas off and think critically about what's going on to get that understanding of what are we doing for that type of collaboration? How are we going through, and the middle bullet point there, what is right for the company? Not just what's right for me, what makes my life easier, but what is the right decision for the company? And what's the right decision for the ecosystem that my company is in? I've got to think about me and my company first, but we also have to know that whatever decisions we have rippling effects on other organizations that we work with. So let's make sure that we're operating in the best possible interests of everybody involved, but we've got to prioritize ourselves in there. That's just a reality. So get yourself that good devil's advocate inside your organization, outside your organization, wherever it happens to be. I do that often for a number of different Imagine customers. We'll just have just a meeting to bounce ideas off of each other and see where things go. There's no expectations coming into it, no expectations coming out of it. We're just talking, sharing experiences, thoughts, and seeing where the conversation leads. It's a good thing to do. It's a very good thing to do. And then as we're talking about project delivery, what are all the different gaps that we have identified by talking about those major 3 topics going into here about remote solutions? Based off of all that, where are there gaps in what you can do to deliver on your projects? Do you know everything that you don't know? There was an example that we gave in the first webcast of how are you processing markups and red lines as an example, in addition to everything else that you're seeing here. And that was the question of, do you have anybody working out of their home office that's printing out a D-sized piece of paper, but only has an 8.5 11 printer at home? So they're printing out a series of 8.5 11 prints and taping them all together, pulling out their red Sharpie, marking things up, taking a picture of that, emailing that picture back. There's better ways to get things done. Hopefully nobody's doing that still, but I have no doubt that that was or even still is happening in certain cases. So how are you doing these things when you're working remote? What are those places where you used to be able to have access to all the in-office hardware to do XYZ and now you don't? What are you doing instead? How are you working through all this and leveraging the tools that you do have, or identifying what are the tools that you maybe wish you could have had to have there? The last bullet, do you have time blocked out for being social? For me and the team that I work with, it seems to be in a pattern about once a quarter. We've been having virtual happy hours. We've got monthly team meetings where everybody that's not otherwise occupied and can't make it, but everybody who's available comes together and we talk about things and go through some internal learning, all sorts of fun things that are going on. And then again, about once a quarter after that team meeting, we move over to a virtual happy hour, and everybody's got their beverage of choice. Pets are wandering around talking about who knows what. We've talked about movies, upcoming TV shows, what families are doing. Just some work comes in there just because that's life and that's what we are, but we try to keep that minimized and spend our time talking about all sorts of other things, bragging about our kids. One of the most recent ones, we were trying to, in a friendly way, trying to one up each other for those that did have kids. Of my kid is doing this with me, so go, yeah, my kid's doing this with me, like sharing things and being proud of everybody together. Of what types of things we're doing personally, what are you creating off on the side? Just we need to block out and still be with people as just a person, not a work colleague, and talking work all the time. So there was the time before last, so going back a few months, we started that call at 5 o'clock Eastern time. We're coast to coast, but at roughly midnight Eastern, people were still going, and it was great. It was phenomenal, wonderful things, and it helps do what we can to build that sense of camaraderie when we're from the Imagine side, we're heavily geographically separated, coast to coast, US, Canada, whatever. But even when it's a group that would normally be in the same office, you need that social piece. So we've got that going on. Now, all of that being said, when we're talking about workflow and project delivery and knowing the tools that you have and what are we doing to optimize what we have and what we can do and what we're available to process during the working hours that we have. Blatant plug here, so going to be upfront with it whenever it comes around. But one of the things to think about is how are you dealing with some of these repetitive tasks that are running through your office on a regular basis? And we talked about this in the first webcast too, so hey, you get it again. But imagine it's got a piece of software called Clarity that does specifically work with automating various processes. If you needed to have a set of PDFs printed every Thursday so that Friday everybody's got an updated set of documents to work through a design review meeting, you can schedule it to print out your entire sheet set for any number of projects Thursday night, so Friday morning it's there, or every night if somebody wants to see things. Uploading and downloading files from Autodesk BIM 360 Collaboration Pro, to be able to batch run your Dynamo scripts across any number of different Revit files. There's dozens and dozens of different things that we can automate, saving on average like 20 hours per project per year, 20 hours per project per month in this type of task automation, which then turns around and says, okay, you person, staff working at home, wherever you are, now we've got a better way to spend our time rather than watching progress bars roll around on our computer. So what can we do to help out with that? Insights, understanding the health and quality of your Revit files. One of the pieces that our customer I just saw recently in data reporting was where we can take parameter information out of Revit and put it into a SQL database that Clarity reads. And then from that SQL database, we can start pulling in different types of reports and data sheets. And one of the customers was putting in data about doors that they wanted to see. And through this Clarity interface, a non-Revit user would be able to go into their company Clarity portal running on their hardware and be able to see information about the locking on the hardware information about doors without having to bug somebody about Revit, without having to know anything about Revit, without having to whatever. They could do it on a phone, a laptop, whatever. Cool stuff. But how can you leverage some tools like that, whether it's Clarity or other tools, to your advantage, knowing that everybody's in this dispersed environment? And take all of that and go into basically a health check to understand better how are you doing things. Take a day and gather information. We do this as a service as well, whether you're doing it with us or not. Think of it. Carve out that time to better understand what you're doing from that remote work environment to be able to say, here's where we can have some improvements. Here's where things are going great. Understanding that so that you can have the entire office working more efficiently in whatever mode you're in, hybrid, fully remote. And we've got customers that are coming back and saying we will be the very last firm in our region that will be going back to in-person work in the office. We've got other customers for Imagine It that hardly ever stopped working in person. There's a whole range of what's possible out there. You've got to identify what's right for you and work with it. So all of that is what we had in the first webcast. Detailed out further. I went through it reasonably quickly as we're looking at it here. But if we compare where you were a year ago, we just hit that kind of 1-year anniversary recently. If you compare where you were 3 months ago and where you are today, those are 3 maybe radically different environments that you're in. So when we're talking about remote services and considering how am I working and how can I make things better, one question I'll have is, does it matter? And there's a level of snark in here, but there's also a level of reality. Talking about what can we do to make your remote work better? Okay, we've been doing this for a while. In one fashion or another, you've been doing this for a while. Are you really going to make any changes at this stage? And without getting into whys and what's good, what's bad, the realities that we're facing and the things that we're seeing right now is vaccines are going out there. And it's growing, whether we're looking at things on a global basis. Second piece, these were recent screen caps that I grabbed from BBC, from this company. It was IBT, but it's NPR and USA Today. Where are states, counties, individual businesses? What are they doing? How are they opening up? And how is that being affected by the rollout of vaccines? There's all these things that are going around, and if we're looking at all these things that are happening, our world is again changing dramatically, in front of our eyes. I don't even want to call it that, but if we think about all this that's happening, your firm better than I do. So certainly I'd hope that. But do you have an idea of where you're going next? If we're looking at this and we've got this idea of evaluating your workflow and work better remotely, is it worth it? Are you really going to make any changes? And that becomes a really key question, because if we're evaluating this, we'll say normal life ahead. And the question becomes, well, what is normal? There are, again, we've got all sorts of people that we're working with. There are companies that, I'm hearing various reports of, we've gone to work remote and we're not sure that we will ever go back to working in any other way again. There's no sense in us having any leased building space, office space, because we're actually doing really good right now. So the normal life ahead is the normal life we have today. That's one way of looking at things. There's other places where, as soon as we're able to, we are absolutely as a company going to get all of ourselves together again. There was a news article I was reading within the last week that was talking hypothetically. So it's a combination of news and opinion. So you take that for what it's worth. But it was looking at things and saying, well, as we're going back to this, air quoting normal life where people are going to be working in the office, how many companies have people that during this pandemic time where we didn't have to, we had somebody that moved away because I can work remote. I don't have to be living where I was before, so I'm going to move out to the boonies somewhere where it's cheaper. I've got a solid internet connection and life is good. But now everybody else is going back to the office. What about me? Do I have to move back to where I was before to be closer to the office to keep this job or not? That's a good question to have, something to be able to talk through. So as we're looking at that and trying to say, well, what is the new normal? Where are we going? What's it going to look like? Well, the question is evaluating your remote workflow going to be worth it? Is going through those steps of all those things that we talked about before going to work? Is it going to be worth it? And yeah, it's an easy answer. I'm going to be certainly very biased. Of course I am. That's why we're here. It's why we're talking about things. If it was a hard, answer of saying no, we don't need to talk about these things anymore, we wouldn't be doing this webcast. Let's be honest with that. But it is an easy answer because the answer is yes. It is absolutely worth going through and talking about these things, evaluating what we are doing for a remote work workflow. But it has to be within that correct context of where you are, where you're going. Those questions I was asking just a moment ago, they need to be thought about. They need to have some answers or at least a general vision of a direction that you think you might be going. We have to have something there. So as it's saying here, are you staying remote? Are you going to go to move from remote to hybrid? Are you going to stay hybrid? Are you going to go back into the office? If you're going back into the office, does your company have a plan for how you're going to do that? How was your office set up before? Are you going to be doing things where you were a little bit more crowded before, but now we want to get a 6-10 foot spacing between different people? How are you doing that? What's your plan look like to get people through? Are you going to be doing things where you just have certain teams come back into the office on a regular cadence and you have teams that'll meet in person? And then when that team isn't meeting, then everybody works remotely. And so we've got this kind of ebb and flow, and you've got to work out a hoteling schedule for the office and desk space and meeting space that you've got. Is anybody going to have a desk that they call their own inside your firm and go truly to that type of hoteling type of mode? How busy are you? How well has your firm weathered the storm? Now, we're having lots of conversations with customers these days talking about just business level discussions, not talking about, how is your Revit subscription working? How's BIM 360 working? No, we're just talking business. How is your business thriving, or where are you struggling as we're going through this pandemic world that we're working in? And based off of understanding what your business is doing, where are the next steps? Have you had to lay off or furlough staff? Have you been hiring? Have you been stable through here? What's it looking like? What are your business objectives for the coming year? And how does remote work impact, support, or challenge any of those business objectives? All of these types of things are coming through there. What's your local government guideline set going to look like from your local health department versus if you've got, like Imagine It, offices in multiple locations? Not everybody's going to have the same guidelines based off the state, the county, the city, the whatever that you're in. Things are going to be different. So how do those change and impact the dispersed project teams that we've got? So context is everything. Yes, it's important to have these conversations, but the context we've got today is different from the context we had 3 months ago, is different from the context we had a year ago. And it's going to change again. If we take a look at it another 2 to 3 months from now, that context may have changed. Just because it's changing doesn't mean it's not worth having the conversation. Whatever you do now, if you've got no idea, take your best guess. Take the facts and the information that you've got available to you today and make that first step. Because no matter what, you might miss, you probably will miss, and that's fine. You'll be closer than you were if you just decided to do nothing. You'll be that much more prepared for what's going on. And in context, if you're not aware of the picture here, it's just a play on the old parable of the what was it, the three blind men that were trying to identify what was an elephant. Each one touched a different part of the elephant and thought it was something completely different because they weren't looking at the whole picture. So we've got to get the proper context of the whole picture, not just that little silo of information that you're aware of in your spot. So as you're looking at these things and doing that, it might mean is your role a designer, an architect, an engineer, a model coordinator, a BIM manager, a technician? Are you C-suite? Where are you inside this conversation? You have a different perspective. So let's say we're talking and you have the role of being in charge of the BIM environment for your company. Whether you've got the title of BIM manager or not, you've got something through there. You might have to turn around and talk to some other folks inside your company to be able to understand the overall business goals and objectives a little bit better so that you can be planning your side. Maybe those are conversations you have on a regular basis. Maybe they're not conversations you have on a regular basis. But you got to be starting to think about these things. So, what are your personal objectives for the year? Not the corporate objectives. Let's go entirely internal here and think selfish for a minute. What are your objectives? If you're anything like me, figuring out those objectives can be exceedingly difficult. What do I want to be doing next year or 5 years or 10 years from now? I've never been one that's been able to have an effective 10-year plan. Or at least if I'm setting a 10-year plan, it's with the understanding of this is what I think it is now. And at any point in time going forward, that plan might change. And that, again, that is okay. If you're thinking about those things and you just can't bring it into your head, find that person, that sounding board to talk to, the devil's advocate that we spoke of earlier, to be able to think about things and bounce it off together. Get part of your, if you've got a user group regionally or different types of trade organizations that you might belong to, bounce ideas off of things there just to get your creativity flowing, getting rolled. If once you have an understanding of where you're thinking you are internally, then start working about what are those corporate objectives. This is what I'm thinking for me personally. What's the company want to do, and how are you helping the company make progress toward those goals? And how does remote work impact those goals? So we're tying it back. We're not just a pure business discussion about pure business. We want to tie it back to the topic of this presentation, remote work. But if the company goal is we need to change from doing 75% new construction to doing 75% renovation, because as an organization we believe that there's going to be a lot more work in renovation coming out of this than there was before as people are reconfiguring all their spaces. Somebody else might look at their region that they do work in and say, you know what, we need to focus on other types of projects because the commercial real estate that we were in before, we think it's going to go south. And we don't think there's going to be much renovation work because people are going to abandon their workplaces completely. Both perspectives might be equally valid depending on the market you serve, the area, the region that you serve as well. I'm not putting any judgment call of what's the right thing for you. I don't know. We need to know more about you, a company, you, a person, before we can help out with any of those types of conversations. And as you're going through that, I alluded it to before, but as a company, are you growing, shrinking, are you stable? And where were you before and where do you see yourselves now with all the different various government programs happening nationally, globally, wherever? Where do you see that as a company, and how does that impact what you're doing from a remote, excuse me, a remote versus a local workforce? Going beyond that, Day to day, are you doing what you should or what you think you should? If you talk to your boss, if you don't have it already set up and documented somewhere, what's your boss say that they want you to be doing? Are you actually doing that? Or are you constantly being pulled away by distractions? If you were to talk to my boss, yeah, it's a lot of the second for me, and that's not always a good thing. And in fact, maybe all more often than not, it's not a good thing. So we've got to work with it. There's places where I know I've got to be able to do better. If we've ever had a one-on-one conversation somewhere, I'm all about chasing rabbits, and that can be good in some places from a creative brainstorming style. It can also not be good if you just need to buckle down and get some stuff done. But day to day, are you doing what you should, or are you getting distracted? And what of all those things that you are doing are things that you like to do versus you're doing it because you have to, but you don't like it. It's not to say you'll be able to stop doing the things that you don't like, but making sure you have that understanding of, are the things that you don't like doing also the things that are distracting you from what you should be doing? That'd be sweet. That'd be great, because then you've got a really good excuse to stop doing or find somebody else to do the things you don't like to do. That's not always going to be the case, but identify that. So we've got these pros and cons working out there. If you could make anything change inside your business, what would you do to make your life easier? What would you do to make your boss's life better? I mean, there's some level of backside kissing that comes from here. That's not the intent, but if we think about this from a business perspective, it's not that we're trying to suck up to the person above you or whatever's going on. It's the idea that if you are working to make your work life better, and then you look at the people around you, some of whom happen to be superiors, and you're doing what you can to make your superior's life better, the, I think, fair assumption is that even if you don't have a distinct list of here's the 10 objectives for our company in the coming year, if you're doing something to make the senior level people in your company happy, that is positive to the business, and that's a good thing. So understanding those helps you figure out the context for all these things. And as we're doing that, is part of what it is. You've got a senior person in the company that just hates this whole remote working thing. Anything we can do to make it easier for that person as we're working remote is good. Anything we can do to help that person get maybe better access to data, better access to self promoting, not self promoting, self serving them to be able to get PDFs coming out of Revit files or AutoCAD files, to be able to do these things on their own without having to grab somebody else, and that somebody else isn't just down the hall anymore. Doing those types of things is positive for the business. We just need to be able to identify what they are. It's make worry. It's get your own work life in order and understand it as best you can. And then once you know where your head is at, start looking around at the people around you, whether it's virtually around you or physically around you, and do what you can to make their lives a little bit better too. Every little bit helps. You may not hit it all the time, but we get closer, we'll be that much better. So as you're doing all that, hopefully you can also convince the people around you to be doing the same in one fashion or another, so that we end up getting this collective of people working together to try and help each other out, to make everybody's life, work and otherwise, a little bit better as you're going through, and leverage all the resources that you have for that. Like I've mentioned a few different times through here, I'm regularly having some different conversations with customers of ours just to talk about what I'm seeing. I'm talking with people throughout the US and Canada on a regular basis, and take that information into every conversation I have with every other customer. And this is what I'm seeing happening on a national level. Now, I know that I've got my blinders on. If you talk to anybody on my team, I've said it often that I know I've got blinders, but knowing that I have blinders doesn't mean that I magically get to see the things that I'm blind to. I just know that there's things that I don't see. So if I'm talking to working my way through something and you see, well, hey, Joe, blah, 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 tell me. let me know what's going on. There's no reason to hold that back and say, well, he must be thinking about this already because it's so obvious. And that's not true. Let's leverage each other through here and just have some business conversations on a just whatever sort of regular cadence it needs to be. Whether it's somebody on my team talking to your account rep, whoever it is, let's start sharing and leveraging this common knowledge and things that we've got to talk about it. Like I've said at the very beginning, imagine it's been working in some level of hybrid and remote since the day I started. And so it's 21 years with me, and the company existed before then. So it was even before that point. Back when the mobile training lab that we had was a series of desktop tower computers in a cargo van. We're a little bit different now, but let's leverage those things and the knowledge that we have and share and work with it. From an Imagine side, on a formal types of services that we do have, we'll have what we'll call assess and advise, or a strategic process review, where beyond just the conversations that I've talked about already, where it's let's just get together and talk. When we want to get a little more serious about it, then we can dig in and do some deeper analysis for you, with you, about your environment and see where things are going at. Seeing how you're dealing with that remote workflow today. Doing some maybe health checks on your CAD or your Revit files to understand what's happening there. To be able to talk about how are you managing your BIM environment, or your VDC, your virtual design and construction, VDC management world. How are all those things coming through and working for you? And are there places where if you were able to leverage Imagine It to help you through, BIM management, to help you with VDC management if you're on the construction side, so that you could focus your time and attention on the things that mattered more, what benefit would that bring to you? Is it a lot of benefit? Is it a little bit of benefit? Let's think about it. Because where can you leverage Imagine It to be that bridge between you and to success? To be able to better understand what is happening and how are things working through there. To take a look at your template files. Are you building your workflows into your templates? Are you building your standards into your templates? How well is that integrated, so that the easiest way to get things done is the best way to get things done inside your company? How can you automate various processes inside your organization so that you can better deal with the things that require true human intelligence, as opposed to clicking the same 5 buttons 30 times twice a day? What can we do to help out with automating certain things so you can focus on what is truly important? Are you taking the data, the valuable stuff that you've got in, we'll say, BIM, and allowing it to be utilized to make a better facilities management environment for your owner customers? How can that transition from BIM into facilities management be leveraged to benefit your company and to benefit your customers? How can all those things come through? That's really what we're looking at. Is what are the different ways that we can make all of this better for you? Those are places where, as Imagine It, we've been helping our customers do those things for decades now. Where can we be leveraged by you to be something good for your firm? So with that, those are the things that I really wanted to be able to take some time and say, let's think about this. Let's work through some of that together so that we can better understand what's going on and how all that's coming through. So I'm going to pause here. If you've got any questions for anything that we've had, or have a comment that you'd want to share to everybody else that's on here, I'm going to go ahead and pause and get into the Q&A. I'll say thank you very much for your time. As we said in the early part of this presentation, it is being recorded. You will be sent a link for that. But let's take the questions. I'm going to open up the Q&A pane and see what we have there. And right now, the only thing we've got is, oh, there's another one, but will the recording be made available to everybody? I already answered that, so yes. Not seeing anything else in either comments or questions through there. We'll pause for a little bit just to make sure that there's nothing that people are typing furiously to get into the system. But hopefully the other side of it is If there aren't any serious questions, hopefully it's because it's been exceedingly clear and useful and valuable, and you know exactly the direction you need to go from here on your own or with us. If you do have any questions beyond this and something occurs to you later on, reach out to us through contacting us through our website, reaching out to the account rep that you have with ImagineIt, replying back to the invitations or the various links that you'll get from us. There's a bunch of different ways we can get back in touch with each other for whatever is on your mind, whether it's something about working remotely or going into other aspects of your business. That being said, chatted for another 2 minutes here, waiting to see if there are any questions coming around. Having seen none, I think we could probably go ahead and call this closed and say thank you all very much for your time. I truly appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join me. And I hope to have a conversation with you sometime soon. So thank you very much. We'll take care.
Thank you so much for presenting, Joe. Talk soon.